Hello everyone, this is AndresRestart, and this time we are talking about The Legend of Zelda Echoes of Wisdom. Nintendo has released the latest entry in their Ask Developers series, this one being about Echoes of Wisdom. We have the first two parts, and there are some very interesting things that have been said about the game's development, which I want to get into today. But before going forward, let me ask that if you do enjoy my content, to please subscribe and hit that notification bell. So a few things I'd like to point out. Today is going to be more of a simple discussion going over some very key parts to this interview and giving you my thoughts. If you want to read the entire interview, it will be linked in the description below. But before I start diving into this interview, I'd also like to say that I have zero interest in covering the leaks for Echoes of Wisdom. The entire game has been leaked. We will not be covering that here. The game's coming out in just a few short days. I just don't see the point. So don't worry, there won't be any spoilers here. We're only talking about things officially revealed by Nintendo, and there are some very cool things that have been revealed regarding the development of the game, so let's start diving into it. Now, to start things off, I'd like to point out the people involved with this interview. We have Eiji Aonuma, the overall Zelda series producer. We also have, who they pointed out in this interview, the first ever female director for The Legend of Zelda, Tomoe Sano, coming from Nintendo EPD, the Zelda team, and also Satoshi Terada, a director from Grezzo. So this is a collaborative effort, but yes, Grezzo is the developer for Echoes of Wisdom, the team we thought was working on new 2D Zelda for a very long time already, well before it was even officially announced. The first thing I want to tackle is this interesting conversation that sprouted up from what's said right here. Satoshi Terada. Hello, I'm Satoshi Terada from Grezzo. I originally started out as a designer, mainly doing terrain design and level design, but this is the first time I've directed a project. I first got involved with the Legend of Zelda series on the remake of The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time. In the previous project, the remake of The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening, I was in charge of the development of the art style, 3D backgrounds, and lighting. This was the first time Grezzo worked on a brand new game in the Legend of Zelda series. So, the crazy thing that's been pointed out here is that Ocarina of Time is a remake, like Link's Awakening. Link's Awakening has definitely been remade for Nintendo Switch, but Ocarina of Time for Nintendo 3DS on the actual box is referred to as a remaster. If you go back and read the Ask Developer interviews for Ocarina of Time 3D back in the day, they referred to it as a remaster, working on the code, building on top of it, not building something totally new. But some people are going to see this and see that an actual developer referred to Ocarina of Time as a remake and just decide that, yep, it's a remake, so there it is. However, if we scroll further down here, they also refer to Twilight Princess as a remake. The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess HD released on Wii U in March 2016. This is a remake of The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess, a game released for Nintendo GameCube and Wii in December 2006. Twilight Princess HD, by any modern standard, is not a remake. That tech demo footage we saw for Wii U would have been a remake. So, the point is here, they're referring to literally every single Zelda game that has been revisited in some way as a remake. In other words, they are using the term remake very loosely, the way it used to be referred to back in the day. Now we make the distinguishment because there are so many different remasters and definitive editions and remakes and reimaginings. There's just quite a spectrum here. But basically what I'm trying to get at here is I don't think this is really any sign of anything. I just think they're just referring to every single game they revisited as a remake, and there's really nothing else to draw from it from just that. Moving on though, let's check out this part. Thank you. You use the phrase, a brand new top-down Legend of Zelda game. What led to the development of a new game this time? Aonuma, actually, I've always wanted to establish a 2D, top-down Legend of Zelda series that's separate from the 3D entries like The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. The game style and how it feels are completely different when the world is viewed in 3D from behind the character to when the world is viewed from a top-down perspective. We wanted to cherish that kind of diversity in the Legend of Zelda series. Amid all this, we felt that the remake of The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening on Nintendo Switch, which we developed with Grezzo, had become our new approach in terms of graphics and gameplay feel as a top-down Legend of Zelda game for Nintendo Switch generation. Grezzo had established an excellent way of reviving the top-down Legend of Zelda experience for a modern era, so I thought we could develop something completely new that had never been done before. So the interesting takeaways I have from this is that yes, absolutely, Nintendo is going to continue the 2D top-down series. There was some debate that Nintendo would just stick with open-air Zelda and just do remakes for 2D Zelda. But here Aonuma is expressing that he wants to have both series existing alongside of each other, and this Echoes of Wisdom thing isn't just a one-off. So there will be more. But also an interesting thing to note is that he refers to it as a 2D top-down Legend of Zelda game. So essentially, when we talk about the next 2D Zelda, that is a correct phrasing. When we talk about top-down Zelda, that is a correct phrasing. There are some people that are like, oh, it's just 2D Zelda. Oh, it's just top-down Zelda. Well, I mean, technically it's 2D top-down Zelda, but literally in the words of Aonuma himself, he refers to the series as 2D top-down. Even though, yes, there is technically 3D visuals, from a gameplay perspective, he refers to it as a 2D top-down Zelda game. The next part I want to discuss is how they went about choosing the gameplay for this game. So there was this big brainstorming session where Grezzo was offering ideas to Aonuma. Here Tarada says, so we went through the ideas that came out of the pitch and picked out a variety that looked good. From there, we decided to move forward with a focus on copy and paste gameplay, and gameplay that combines top-down view and side view. Here Aonuma continues and says, these were the two basic elements, and from there I asked them to think of ways to add some freedom. Having worked on games in the Legend of Zelda series over the years, we started to feel that fans may not continue playing this franchise unless they can think independently and try various things freely on their own, rather than following a set path. Even when it comes to solving puzzles in a game in the Legend of Zelda series, having the excitement of solving puzzles in your own unique way makes the game The Legend of Zelda-like. Hence, we need to increase the degree of freedom to achieve that. With this in mind, I asked Grezzo to use those two elements as a foundation for the gameplay and add freedom on top of it. So what I find extremely interesting here is that what Aonuma views as Zelda-like is this freedom we feel from the puzzle mechanics and all. The way Breath of the Wild works, the way Tears of the Kingdom works, how you can just find different ways to do things, that freedom, he assigns that to Zelda now. That is Zelda now, which is extremely interesting because in the past, you could argue that a lot of the Zelda games didn't really have that much freedom. There was one way to solve a puzzle, and that was it. It was about figuring it out. Now, I recognize some people are going to complain about this, but to me, this is great to hear because to tell you the truth, the most exciting thing I'm looking forward to in Echoes of Wisdom is that freedom. What I love about Breath and Tears is that freedom. Being able to continually find new ways to do different things, that is what makes these games so special above everything else. So, I'm all for it. I love it. I can't wait to see more. But as this interview continues, they start talking about, essentially, a dungeon maker. So, after a large-scale pitch for ideas, two foundations were set. What kind of gameplay did that translate to? Terada. We were exploring a few different ways to play the game in parallel. In one approach, Link could copy and paste various objects such as doors and candlesticks to create original dungeons. During this exploration phase, this idea was called an edit dungeon because players could create their own Legend of Zelda gameplay. And then here Aonuma says, they showed it to me and told me to give it a try. As I've played, I started thinking that while it's fun to create your own dungeon and let other people play it, it's also not so bad to place items that can be copied and pasted in the game field, and create gameplay where they can be used to fight enemies. That was the beginning of gameplay using echoes. The gameplay was shifted from creating dungeons up until then to using copy and pasted items as tools to further your own adventure. So this segment is very interesting for several reasons. One, in development, they were using Link to practice around with these different concepts in editing a dungeon. So I assume that at some point later into this as developer series, we're going to hear about the decision to go with Princess Zelda, but during this dungeon maker part of development, they were still sticking with Link. And on the note of editing a dungeon, making a dungeon, what I find so fascinating about this is that Link's Awakening had a little bit of a dungeon maker, and clearly this game's a follow-up to that, and so they kind of were sticking with the dungeon making concept. But Aonuma had different ideas and shifted them in a different direction where they went beyond just the dungeon making. The next fascinating part to me is where they start talking about the impact of having the same object work under different multiple viewpoints here. So here Sano says, I did notice from the very beginning that copying new things is a lot of fun in itself. The edit dungeon concept involved copying various things during your adventure out on the game field, then collecting things to copy. I noticed that if I pasted something that was only present in the side view perspective into a location with a top-down perspective, it worked just fine. In 2D games, even if an object looks the same, it's often made and used completely differently between top-down view and side view. But Grezzo created a single object that would function in both views. Continuing, the same object could be used in multiple points of view. Sano, yes, it's the same object, but it seems to work differently when you look at it from another angle, which is interesting to us. For example, in The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening, there is an enemy called a thwomp that falls from above and crushes things below, and only appears in the side view perspective. If you copy that and paste it into the top view, you can drop it down from above and crush things below, or conversely, you can ride on the thwomp and use it to climb upward. And here they have a little video. And we see some developer footage there where we can see the different perspectives, and it's interesting. And look, he can literally jump down there, that's crazy. But you literally see Link as part of this gameplay, right? It's Link using some sort of special wand ability. It's like a blue wand or rod. So just some interesting stuff that they do here. And here they say, I was surprised to see that even though the functions are the same, you can use it in new ways just by changing the viewing angle. Aonuma, that felt outrageously fun. Sano, I thought to myself, wow, I never knew this was possible. Of course, creating dungeons was fun, but being able to copy various objects and use them in different places was even more fun. And that's something they continue to talk about here, how they wanted you to have the option to find echoes and use them in various places throughout the world and think about how that echo would respond in different environments. This goes beyond just perspective, but this perspective adds a whole other angle, literally and figuratively, but also just the settings, how something might work in an icy area, or a fiery area, or other areas. And when you think about it like this, it really puts things into perspective just how much they had to design around. They had to design over 100 different echoes that would have a variety of applications in so many different settings. And then how they might combine with each other adds a whole other layer as well. But there's one more thing they discussed here that I found to be very interesting. Indeed, there wouldn't be much point in having so many echoes if you couldn't make use of them. Sano, also, Princess Zelda doesn't have a way of attacking directly initially. So there was a tendency for the gameplay using the echoes to just end up being a situation where you watch things you copied do the work. It felt like they were doing everything for you and you were being made to wait. So we asked Grezzo to adjust it so that players would feel an immediate sense of accomplishment like, I did it. For example, if you made an echo of a monster, that echo would immediately attack an enemy, just like you swinging a sword. If you wanted to light a fire, you could use an echo with that ability, and it would light the fire straight away. We made adjustments like these all the way through the game's development so that these kinds of intuitive responses would feel exciting for players. And I think what's being described here is such an incredible important thing that they did. Because yes, there are many games where they might give you this ability to copy and paste all things throughout the world, and maybe they'll even go through the lengths of considering how these different things might react in different environments, but they went another step further and thought about how this might impact typical gameplay and what fans might want. They made sure to make the echoes feel like something quick and responsive. So if you do summon an enemy, it functions as essentially a straightforward attack. There isn't as much of a waiting game. I think this is going to make a big difference for our actual gameplay. It's going to make the use of the echoes and summoning different echoes to fight for you a lot more interesting, even in combat. And actually I lied, there's a whole other section I want to discuss here which I think is a pretty big deal. Actually maybe the biggest deal. So here it says, with not only echoes but also the bind feature, it must have taken a lot of effort to make all this work and realize the number of possibilities without breaking the gameplay. It did. At the beginning of the game's development, we were thinking about a lot of restrictions on gameplay, assuming that certain things would definitely break the game mechanics or stop the game from working properly. We had ideas like being limited to only using 20 echoes in a dungeon. Lots of ideas like this made it so you couldn't do things you had previously done. But it would have been frustrating for players if they couldn't use a solution that worked in a previous situation. I love how they're just thinking about the player perspective here. So one day, we decided to scrap that approach and not impose any restrictions. Eiji Aonuma says, I used to believe that the theory behind games was that being set loose from restraints gives a feeling of freedom and growth. That's why old games were designed to slowly lift the restrictions that were there at the start. For a long time, game developers like ourselves have made games while firmly believing this theory to be right, and we felt safe creating restrictions in line with it. However, the Echoes gameplay could fly in the face of this theory at times. When you're actually playing it, it can be more fun not having the restrictions in the first place. And so we asked ourselves, what do we want to do about this one? Shall we remove it? And then gradually begin removing these restrictions? Over time, most of the restrictions we thought were necessary at the start of development were no longer needed. It even led us to allow things that we were worried at first would provide too much freedom. It's strange, isn't it? It's almost as if introducing some freedom attracted even more freedom. And this kind of goes back to what we were discussing earlier about freedom, bringing in freedom. And ultimately what it's led to is diminishing the amount of restrictions. So I'm very curious how this is going to play out in Echoes of Wisdom, but this does mark a change in philosophy that we've been discussing a lot about lately when it comes to Zelda. Prior Zelda games were made with this concept in mind of having some restrictions and then as you progress, some of those restrictions loosening. But with more recent Zeldas, they're just finding more and more ways to build on the freedom and get rid of those restrictions. But I also do find it curious that they are still thinking about having restrictions. It's not just all freedom, there still needs to be some, but finding that right balance I think is going to be very important for the future of Zelda. So we'll see how things go, but I'm very excited for Echoes of Wisdom, and I can't wait to see what else they have to say and also play the game later this week. But what do you all think? Let me know in the comments below. This is AndresRestart. Thank you so much for listening and watching, and I'll see you all really soon. Take care. Bye.